Quick heads up, this story gets graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion advised.
I'm investigating the disappearance of 12-year-old Tia Sharp.
It goes without saying this is an absolutely terrible time for Tia's family.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart?
I cannot imagine how it must feel for this family after more than 5 days. 80 officers working on this case, 40 of them detectives, 40 of them specialist search officers.
Do you feel under pressure? Do you feel that perhaps the people are looking at you?
It was a sparky girl who was full of life, but you took that life from her.
The house was her sanctuary, the one place she felt completely safe. She went to stay there one weekend and then vanished. Police searched the small house 4 times and found nothing. They didn't realize she was just feet away the entire time. What was really happening in that house is worse than anyone could imagine. Guys, thank you so much for being here. I promise to make this video worth every second of your day. Before we jump in, if you have a quick moment, drop your location or current weather in the comments. I honestly love seeing how far this family reaches across the world. Look, here's the deal. I am striving to be the best resource for you. If I earn your trust today, please subscribe, but if I don't, tell me exactly why. I seriously want to improve for you. Sorry for taking your precious time. Let's start. To understand this story, we need to explore the life of Stuart Hazell. He was born on May 26, 1975. Now, I am always the first person to step in and acknowledge when somebody has had a difficult childhood. We simply cannot deny that a really challenging upbringing creates deep cracks in the very foundations of an individual's world. It absolutely shouldn't be the case. Children deserve to be born into families who love them, who cherish them, and who protect them. It is truly devastating that so many children end up in situations that are far less than satisfactory and at times are deeply troubled. Stuart Hazell was born into a very unhappy situation. From the very beginning, he had very little contact with his mother. She was involved in a chaotic and unstable lifestyle, and so, obviously, there was a significant level of disruption in that world. At the same time, his father had ongoing issues with the law. So, you could argue these were not great foundations for a young life. I appreciate there will be people who watch this who have experienced similar circumstances and have raised their children amazingly. There will be former offenders who have learned their lesson and become truly pro-social role models for their kids. It really does take all sorts. What I'm saying is that in his specific case, it wasn't that way. He didn't have a parent who, despite their circumstances, also gave him the foundations of support. He didn't have a father who came out of the system having learned valuable lessons. So ultimately, he would have experienced deep feelings of abandonment and attachment issues. And let's be honest, he was massively let down by the very people who were meant to take care of him. His father was an individual who was consistently in and out of the system. As we'll discuss later, Hazell also followed a similar path. So we see this tragic cycle of repetition born from this high level of dysfunction. Stuart Hazell ended up in the care system at a very young age. And again, there will be people who watch this who have been in care, and for them, care will have been the very thing that made a positive difference in their lives. They will have gone on to achieve incredible things. However, there is a very large proportion of individuals who go into care who come out with significant challenges, with very low levels of educational attainment and a whole heap of psychological distress. Because it's really hard being a child in care, closing that door at the end of every day, and knowing that you haven't got people on your side, familiarly in your environment. That is a profoundly abandoning experience, and Hazell definitely would have encountered those feelings as well. You won't be surprised to learn that Hazell had serious issues with his mental health, including quite a history of depression. He also struggled with unhealthy coping mechanisms. So clearly, this was not a happy human being. We cannot ignore the impact of ending up in care and being let down by his primary caregivers. It will have had huge ramifications, without a single doubt. Now, it's suspected that he suffered from something known as unsocialized conduct disorder. So let's talk about that for a moment. Let's look at the symptoms of this particular condition so you can understand what it entails. You can expect to see hyperactivity within it. That's going to make learning difficult. It's also going to make forming positive relationships. At times, relatively difficult because of the lack of focus. And honestly, people who are hyperactive can be incredibly challenging for teachers, so to speak. You can also expect to see emotional difficulties such as anxiety, depression, and even obsessions. We can expect to see things like aggression, antisocial behavior patterns, and social isolation from peer groups. This means he wouldn't have necessarily had close friends. That's a really, really powerfully disorientating experience for a young person because you want to feel a part of something greater than yourself. And he would have struggled with that because of this classification. Hazel really did adopt poor coping mechanisms to deal with his mental health problems, which again, all fits into this particular state of poor adjustment. But a lot of us can do that without it becoming a major issue. However, if you have a lot of cracks in your developmental foundation, there can be some pretty serious consequences. You impact the development of the brain on top of all these other issues that you're already facing day to day. And let's be honest, if you have problems and you want them to go away and you drink, then you kind of anesthetize those feelings. It's temporary, of course. It's a really poor coping strategy. But when you haven't got other coping strategies around you, and this just seems to take away the difficult feelings, well, understandably, when you're young, that seems like a better scenario than facing what you feel. And if you haven't got the role models and guidance around you, that can lead to those decisions becoming a dependency. So all of what I've just told you means that he would have had big issues that were exacerbated by the fact that he fits this particular classification, but also because he was using alcohol to cope. He was in trouble constantly at school. And his criminal behavior, it started very, very young. So basically, you see him almost graduating into his father's footsteps. And he actually referred to it, interestingly, as the Hazel curse. Now, psychologically for me, when I hear somebody use that kind of ownership, it bodes really badly for the future. It suggests that the individual sees that there is no escape. It is a given that they will follow a certain type of pattern and behavior. So the fact that Hazel sees it as a curse, meaning I am powerless to change this, I have a helplessness here because this is a curse, it's not something I'm choosing, it's something that I'm inheriting. It is the natural order within our family. This means that he wouldn't necessarily have confronted the fact that this was, to some degree, an individual choice. Yes, there is no doubt whatsoever that he had a difficult start, but every single action has a consequence. And what he's doing in saying that there is a curse is he's giving away the opportunity to take the power back and to change. He sees himself as ultimately predestined to this negative behavior. And when somebody has that belief that they are predestined to arrive at a certain destination, it can lead to large levels of self-sabotage. A choice to actually get it over with and arrive where they believe they're ultimately going to arrive anyway. That's just something that I potentially wanted to share with you, purely on the basis that it's an interesting connection for me psychologically. His first conviction arrived when he was just 14, so he's very young. Hazel would go on to have over 30 convictions. These included disorderly behavior in 2001. He was fined in 2002 for a racially aggravated common altercation. What is anybody doing taking one of those out on the street? It's as simple as that. He was also caught for lots of other various offenses. From day one, primarily from going into care and onwards, you are in a system. And ultimately, it feels like there's a level of institutionalization for Hazel in his early life. At 16, things are bad. They really are. He's living in a homeless shelter in Soho, which is just heartbreaking. Also, when he was living at that homeless shelter in Soho, absolutely nobody should be in a scenario where they're meant to be being protected, only to find themselves in a situation that should never happen to anyone. And without any doubt whatsoever, this kind of an event will have massive repercussions for the human being who's endured it, just in terms of trusting the world around them. By the way, a little caveat here. I'm not going to keep up this sympathy and empathy and compassion for this guy. Just go with me on this. At this point, we're still dealing with a young adolescent who's been horribly let down. It is reprehensible that at 16 years of age, he is living in a homeless shelter in Soho. It would be terrifying. No matter how streetwise and street smart you are, that is a terrible situation to be in. You do not have the resources, socially, psychologically, emotionally, or financially. You do not have the wherewithal, consciousness-wise, to cope at 16 in those circumstances. That is society failing, right there. And we have to talk about that, because the logistics of crime involve contributory factors. Could this have been changed? Is there a possibility that if interventions occurred or a safety net was created, could crimes that create catastrophes have been prevented? And that can be difficult, can't it? Because we all want to believe in individual choice, and I get that too. But if we don't look at the systemic issues in our society, particularly and primarily when it comes down to crime and the repetition of offenses, then we're not doing enough to change the potential outcomes. We have to take responsibility for that as a society. Because it takes a village to raise a child is a saying, and it's a saying for a very, very good reason. Now, around 2007, Hazel meets Natalie Sharp and begins a relationship with her. And Natalie Sharp had a 7-year-old daughter, Tia Christine Sharp. She was born on the 30th of June, 2000. And look, Tia was known as having a really gorgeous personality. She was bubbly, she was happy, she was a really social girl. She was known to be full of life. There was just something alive and excited about her. When I've heard Natalie and her mother talk about Tia, they miss that energy, that life and soul, that bubbly personality that blessed them daily. And you can feel the loss when they discuss that, because everybody's personality impacts the world around them, on the people that they share that world with. And Tia certainly was one of those individuals. So, Natalie had actually been separated from Tia's dad, Stephen Carter, before Tia was even born. And I'll be honest, when she got together with Hazel, it was just one of those relationships that died out very quickly. They were together for maybe a week or two. So there certainly wasn't any great animosity between the two of them when they broke up. Relationship-wise, it was just a fleeting connection, shall we say, that petered out incredibly quickly. One could say that was because she had certain levels of taste. But that's not necessarily fair, because the same year, he begins a relationship with Natalie's mother, Tia's grandmother, whose name was Christine Bicknell. Look, I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, a tiny, tiny bit of weirdness, because I just think it's a little bit off when a guy goes out with one person and then decides that after it's broken down, they're going to date another party, who happens to be a blood relative, in this case, the mother. I find it a little bit weird, but nonetheless, that's potentially just one of those ways that you meet, right? I met my partner because he was going out with my daughter. People do meet in the weirdest of ways. I do get that. So they get on. They really do. And he moves into her home in New Addington, London, just after a week of dating, which I think is way too quickly. I really do. Having noted that, think about the fact that Hazel has had a really disrupted past. He's looking for a foundation of support. He's not had a good housing experience. And all of a sudden, you have a woman who is settled, who does know who she is, who has got a foundation of sanctuary in her home, suddenly extending the opportunity for you to become part of that world. That is going to be incredibly intoxicating and fundamentally something that you are going to be looking for. Because, my God, when you have abandonment and attachment issues to the level that Hazel would have, you are going to be desperate to feel settled. It is completely natural for human beings to feel that way. Now, that relationship, it was not a flash in the pan. So even though his relationship with Tia's mother had failed very quickly, well, when it came to Christine, that worked effectively. Their relationship lasted 5.5 years. So he was looking for something that made him feel secure. And you have to think to yourself, well, 5.5 years in a kid's life is a long period of time. That meant that, as far as Tia was concerned, Hazel was just a constant feature in her life. He was a trusted party. He was someone that featured on a very regular basis in her day-to-day experience. So, as far as Tia was concerned, Hazel was just grandma's partner, like a step-granddad, essentially. And it seems that Tia really did have a good relationship with Hazel. In fact, by all accounts, and there are many, she idolized him. She went out of her way to spend time with him. And even though he wasn't a blood relative to her, as far as she was concerned, he was a granddad. And he would refer to himself, in fact, as her granddad. And in normal circumstances, that would make my heart sing. Because when kids haven't got great relationships with certain caregivers, or they're missing certain caregivers, and then a step caregiver comes in and just blesses them with a relationship, being a role model, offering mentorship, taking them out, having fun, and reminding them that they are loved and cherished, that has such a positive impact. Particularly because a child knows, you don't need to be part of my life. No, you are choosing to be part of my life. There's not even a blood thing that connects us. And the fact that that individual adult is doing that can speak volumes to that child. It can be restorative when it comes down to fractured relationships elsewhere. So he very much takes on this role. She would regularly go around and visit him and her gran, of course, and they made their home really open to her. They made her aware that she was not just a visitor, she was somebody who was absolutely welcome there 24/7. They even gave her her own bedroom. So again, Tia's experience of her grandma's house is one of sanctuary. It's a place of safety. It's a place where she fully belongs. And I'll be honest, it's admitted by the family that for Tia, that bedroom in that home with her grandma acted as a refuge for her. Because it was relatively, at times at least, troubled and chaotic in her home with her mother. So that acted as this sanctuary, a place to escape. In 2012, well, she's 12 at this point, so Tia is living with her mother, Natalie, and also her stepfather, David. This is in Mitcham in Surrey. Although she was a really happy girl, one of the things that she'd had to cope with throughout her upbringing was her family's dependency issues. Because her mother and David, her stepfather, well, they were both known to social services because they did have problems with substance dependency, and it wasn't low-level dependency. We're talking about the use of serious substances. And that is clearly something that means that at times, parents can take their eye off the ball because they have their own issues. And essentially, I also want to make it clear that in spite of the fact that this would have led to a certain amount of chaos for Tia, and also witnessing things that, look, are fundamentally wrong for children to witness, social services genuinely never considered that Tia was at risk. Yes, they appreciated that she did have a chaotic home life, and actually they investigated her home life in 2011. But they actually concluded there wasn't any need for further assessment. So, arguably, whilst the parents in this case had issues, it wasn't transpiring that she was being placed at risk, and it did transpire that she was having her needs met. And if there were any concerns that played out, they just needed to report them to social services. Now, sadly, it later transpired that an administrative error actually occurred. And that meant that that particular instruction, where they're saying to the school, look, if there's anything that concerns you, get in touch with social services so it can be fast-tracked, was never communicated to the school. And that meant that she did slip completely under the radar. And again, I'm not saying for 1 minute that what I'm going to talk about today could have been preventable from Tia's mother and stepfather's side. I'm just saying that when a service is meant to keep a check on a child for good reason, albeit as a conduit with the school, the point is, when that doesn't play out, how do we know what that child is going through? If people aren't told to notice particular issues, then people aren't going to necessarily take it as seriously if that child is more withdrawn or seems more depressed or is saying things that are a little bit alarming. So it is a mistake, clearly, that that administrative error plays out and the school isn't aware that they're meant to be doing that. On Thursday, August 2nd, 2012, Tia asks her mom, Natalie, if she can go and stay with her grandmother, Christine, and also Hazel, who's 37 years of age at this point. She wants to go over to their home in New Addington over the weekend. Christine was going to be working that night, and this, of course, meant that Stuart Hazel would be the person looking after Tia. Both Christine and Tia's mother at this point have every reason to trust Hazel, simple as that. They believe that he is an individual who has a history of years with this child. We have a child who asks to go and spend time with her grandmother and with her step-grandfather. There are no alarm bells ringing because there has been no historical alarm, so to speak. And the logistics of that mean that for Christine and for Natalie, it makes perfect sense that she would be allowed to go and spend time at Grandma's place, and they have complete trust in Hazel. You can actually see footage of Hazel meeting and walking with Tia at the Croydon train station. They're walking along the platform after getting off a tram at Gravel Hill Station. You see them shopping in a branch of the Co-op supermarket. You see them traveling on a 31 bus. And ironically, this is where you'll see Tia alive for the very last time. But you can arguably, in that moment, recognize that Tia does not look afraid. Tia does not look like she's in fear of this human being. In fact, he is a trusted party. And that is something that I think is always the most alarming and represents the deepest betrayal. The fact that you see a child, a young child, and they just feel completely at ease with this individual, unaware of what he was capable of, just going about their business, not knowing that this would be the last time that anyone would see them in public. That evening, her grandma calls Hazel because she's obviously checking in on him, and she actually can hear Tia laughing in the background. So there's nothing that makes her worried for her safety. But the following day, well, we have a problem. There's literally no sign of Tia at this point. Hazel says, oh, she left that morning. She wanted to go and buy flip-flops in Croydon's Whitgift Center. Time passes. At that point, it initially appeased Christine. Of course, it's not unusual for a young person to go out and shop. But she doesn't come home. This is 100% completely out of character. Look, I will not deny from reports that Tia is an individual who is considered streetwise. So she knows how to deal with life. She knows how to go about her business. She knows what to look out for. You know, she's aware of things like stranger danger. So even though she's streetwise and she knows how to handle herself, there's one thing that she doesn't do, which is to not return home. She's never run away. This is completely out of character. Her family are aware of this, deeply concerned. They love her greatly, so they report her missing straight away to the police. As Hazel is essentially the person who said that he last saw her, the police speak to him. he tells them exactly the same story.
Well, if they believe what they read in the papers, they can do whatever they like, because I know deep down in my heart that Tia walked out of my house. She walked out there, and I know damn well, because she was seen walking down the pathway. I know she made that track down to that way. What happened after that is, I don't know. We're stuck inside here, do you know what I mean? We've got all them papers outside, all putting accusations down, and, do you know what I mean, bad-mouthing everyone, and it's just what you don't need, you know. I know they're trying to help in that, but they can help in other ways, you know what I mean, by finding her back, get her home.
She left the house. She's gone to buy shoes in Croydon's Witt Gift Center. However, what they notice is that her mobile phone is still at the property. So that's kind of out of character, isn't it? I mean, is it just me who isn't quite sure whether my own children have symbiotically connected to their own mobile technology? And if I tried to remove it from their hands, I don't believe I'd be able to. I believe it's become part of their body. The idea of young people leaving mobile phones anywhere aside from in their pocket, bag, or hand is something that very few adults can ever come to terms with because it just doesn't happen. And particularly in these kind of circumstances where it's a young person, that's the way that they communicate if they're safe or otherwise, isn't it? So this isn't normal for a child to leave a mobile phone at home. And the police noticed that it had been last used at 12:42 in the morning on the morning of Friday, August 3rd. Now, later that day, Hazel had also called it. So there is a log suggesting that Hazel has called it potentially to see where she is. The police have some suspicions at this point, and it makes sense. Because it's the last person who's seen somebody that is often the person who had seen them last because they'd done something horrific to that human being. They know that Hazel has been with Tia the previous night, and she's disappeared since. So ultimately, at this point, the police basically put Hazel under surveillance whilst the investigation continues. On the 7th of August, 2012, that's 4 days into Tia's disappearance, well, members of her family at this point are just making such emotional pleas. They just want her home. They are desperate. Can you imagine how it would feel to not have seen your child or your grandchild for 4 days? This young person, they're very young. No child who is happy is going to just run away. It just does not happen. There would have to be a subtext to that reality. And if there's no subtext to that reality, well, we're really concerned because it's out of character and it suggests that they are at risk. And also, the first 24 hours are so important in bringing kids home. This is 4 days, so of course they want to go out and speak to the press. They're desperate for her safe return.
The family want Tia home. They miss her dreadfully. And I wanted to assure you of all the work the Met is doing. And we are doing everything we can, everything we possibly can to find her and trying to support the family at this time. Let me give you a sense of the scale of the inquiry at present. I have had Olympic resources redirected to help in the search for Tia, and over the last 3 days or so, that has meant more than 100 extra uniform officers in the Croydon and Mitcham areas. There are over 80 officers working on this case, 40 of them detectives, 40 of them specialist search officers. We've collected more than 800 hours so far of CCTV footage from buses, from trams, and we've viewed more than 120 hours of that CCTV in live time, and that continues round the clock. I would also like to thank everybody in the Croydon and Mitcham communities that has helped with the investigation so far. I spent time with councillors and with members of the Pathfinders charity on the New Addington estate yesterday evening. I was completely moved by their generosity, their energy and commitment. We were stopped many times on the way to and from by people handing out leaflets showing Tia, and to everyone who is doing that, I wanted to say thank you and please continue to look for her. Can I once again thank every member of the public who has phoned into the incident room. The Met's priority at this time is to find Tia safe and well.
TV image of Tia that was taken on Thursday evening, Thursday the 2nd, before she went missing. And in it she's wearing the outer clothing that we believe she was wearing when she went missing. The only difference is the footwear. If I hold it up, you'll see it's slightly different to the description that was initially released, in as much as it's not a yellow tube type top. You can see it's a yellow vest top. And on the front of it there's a pattern. It's an animal of some description, possibly a dog or a cat. The tight faded jeans are the same description, and she's wearing Ugg boots in this photo, but she was wearing the black Nike trainers with the pink Nike swoosh on. So that's a slight difference.
Her uncle, David Sharp, is actually wearing a t-shirt with her face on it, and it said, "Tia, please come home. You're not in any trouble."
Tia's a 12-year-old normal girl. She has never run away. She's got no reason to run away. She is a playful child. She's not an adult form of any way, but she is very clued up in travelling and local areas and people she knows. Come to us, come home, phone the police, anything. And I want to say thank you to the police for doing everything that they can, and the public for being our support and being out there day and night. I urge you not to stop. I want Tia found, so please do what you're doing.
Just trying to get that message across to her, hoping beyond hope that she is out there, that she's elected to disappear, that somehow the family are maybe not aware of the fact that she's unhappy and that she's just hiding out somewhere or she's visited somewhere else. Just come home. It doesn't matter. Whatever is wrong, we can solve. That's the message. On the 9th of August, 2012, Tia has been missing for 1 week. I wonder how you feel at that moment in time. I've worked with families of individuals who've been through terrible things, and certainly after a few days, the worst fear is that they're not coming home. And on occasion, of course, we see that children and young people do come home. So you can imagine the mindset of people in that moment, how desperate they'll feel. Hazel gives an interview for ITV News. He just flat out denies any involvement. "I had nothing to do with it. You were kind of seen with her the last time, though, and then nobody's seen her since. This is true."
Tell me a little bit about Tia's life. I mean, is she a happy girl? Is she jolly? Has she got any problems?
No, she's got no problems at all. She's a happy-go-lucky golden angel. You know what I mean? She's perfect. There's no arguments, nothing we can think of. Absolutely nothing.
So Tia stays here Thursday night, just with you. Christine's working. Talk me through Friday up until the last time you see her. Tell me exactly what you did.
Tia's come down the stairs around about 10:30, 11, something like that maybe. Because I know she was on about going up to Croydon for about, she wanted to get up early. She picked up your mum's DS up, played the DS for a little while. I said, well, we're going to have some breakfast. So I made her some toast, and she had the toast, and then she wanted a sausage roll, because she's always eating sausage rolls. Basically, and then she was sitting there. She doesn't take her washing up out, so I took her washing up out. Just started doing a little bit of washing up in the kitchen. She was in there. She was telling me what she was doing, but I weren't really logging it into my head. I didn't. Do you know what I mean? Remember, like the kids, they talk to you. It goes in one ear, stays there for a second, it goes out. You know what I mean? As I was hoovering, then she walked out. She walked past me from the front room to go out, and she walked out the front door. That is all I know. And she left her phone on charge, because I told her to sit there and leave her phone on charge. I didn't mean leave it on charge, because what Tia doing, she plays on the BB thing, but then she uses it as it's charging, so there's no charge going through to it. So when I said to her, just leave your phone on charge, it means leave her phone on charge, not use it, let it charge up a bit, then you can actually take it with you or whatever, because she's been responsible to go to Croydon before. She's been responsible to go on trains and buses and trams and everything before on her own.
So when she walked past you and out to the door, did she say anything?
She said, goodbye. Well, I said, well, make sure you're back at 6. She went, yeah. And that was it, and then the door closed and she walks out. I don't take precise times and things like that, but when she walked out that door, I know damn well it was 12:10, according to my clock, because as I was hoovering up the dog's mess by my kitchen, I look up and I've got a great big clock in front of me on the cooker, which says 12:10.
Now listen, you've been living in house arrest,
basically,
almost, for the last 7 days almost now. How's that been?
Oh, it's been horrible. It's been horrible. Do you know what I mean? The family's, we're stuck inside here, do you know what I mean? We've got all the papers outside, all putting accusations down, and they asked me stupid questions yesterday, like, oh, did you do anything? I said, excuse my language, but no, I didn't. I'd never think of that. I'd loved her to bits. She's like my own daughter, for God's sake. We had that sort of relationship. It was that sort of thing. It was just, you know, she wanted it, she got it. She's got a loving home. She's never gone without anything, so I can't work it out. What the hell's going on? We're all out there, they want to report the truth.
Do you feel under pressure? Do you feel that perhaps the people are looking at you?
Well, if they believe what they read in the papers, they can do whatever they like. Because I know deep down in my heart that Tia walked out of my house. She walked out there, and I know damn well because she was seen walking down the pathway. I know she made that track down to that way. What happened after that is I don't know.
And she didn't take a mobile phone from the house. This is also true. But she went to buy flip-flops. There's no evidence of that. This is also true. He's clearly setting up that he's just this innocent, loving person, right? He just claims that she's vanished, you know, as young people do, just vanish. So he says that she came downstairs around 10:30 in the morning, played games on the console for a little while, then she'd had breakfast, then she'd left the house at 12:10 in the afternoon whilst he was hoovering. Because obviously, if you're going to do some kind of plea to the press, you're going to want to let them know about what a good little cleaner you are, what a great little step-granddad you are. Look at me. She left whilst I was being a great house husband. What a diligent little cookie I am. Look, I do not give a damn about his household chores. A child is missing. Stop acting like father of the year and tell us where she is. It actually makes my blood boil. Genuinely, psychologically, that's manipulation. No one gives a crap whether you are hoovering or dusting. What we care about is the fact that the child that was in your care has disappeared, not the fact that you get on with your daily chores. It shouldn't even be figuring in your head. He reckons that, at this point, he told her to be back at 6 in the evening. As we know, Tia's mobile had been left charging in the house. But he's had a bit of time, hasn't he? A little bit of time. Why would a kid leave a mobile phone in the house? Right, he's got to think about a reason for that. So what he says is he told her to leave it on charge, but he hadn't actually meant for her to leave it in the house when she left. So he kind of creates this story, whereas, again, he's saying, I'm a diligent step-granddad. I wanted her to take her phone. But I wanted her to know that there was enough charge on it, and it was just her mistake that she went out without actually taking it with her. So in that interview, he's more concerned, in my understanding of it, to express what a great step-granddaddy he is, and all these things that he does around the house, and what a very responsible caregiver he is, giving the individual boundaries to return home, making sure that they have a phone that is fully charged, and there's just been an error on her part that this hasn't played out. Also, in that interview, he basically complains about being under house arrest, essentially harassment from the media. And he says he loves Tia to bits, described her as being like his own daughter, and said that despite all these accusations that are flying around, he knows deep down in his heart she left the house that day. I challenge whether he has a heart, but he believes that deep down in his heart, so deep down, that it's deeper down than even he knows, because he doesn't feel that connection. That's how deep down it is. So deep down that it isn't actually there. It's gone straight through his heart to his feet, into hell as far as I'm concerned. Just my own opinion of that situation. He's also constantly saying, I don't know what happened to her. I'm innocent, essentially. And then he stares into the camera and says, Tia, come home, babe. What a narcissistic manipulator. It's all about him. You know, look, if your kid's gone missing or a relation of yours, that is a child that you love. The last thing you're that concerned about is whether people think you did it in the first instance because you know you didn't. You know it's going to come out in the wash. All you care about is getting that child home. If all you're going to do is go on national television and protest your innocence and complain about how everybody's looking at you because you have happened to be the last person who was with said child, and you kind of don't make sense as far as having an understanding as to how they've left the house but not been seen, because there's CCTV everywhere. That's why we talked earlier on about how he's seen with her on that last day when she's seen in public. The point is, you are absolutely trying to displace the blame from you elsewhere. In this case, he's essentially blaming Tia for leaving and not having a phone. Understandably, this is huge news, and rightfully so. We have a young girl who's just disappeared. 80 police officers, they join the search for Tia. And you know what? They also start trawling through the CCTV. They go through 800 hours of CCTV footage. Also, they search Christine and Hazel's house. This is on 4 occasions. That includes 2 searches of the actual loft space. That's on the 4th and 5th of August, 2012. Now, first of all, when they search the loft and the place itself, it's done by an untrained officer, local officers. Then they have a second, more thorough search. That's by 2 sergeants and 2 PCs. Hazel actually helps them. He actually goes and gets a chair so that they can get access to the loft. But nonetheless, he's a helpful little cookie, bringing that chair. Oh, I'll help you. But that's clever. Because if you really want to manipulate a scenario where you seem like you've nothing to hide, you're going to be doing things that seem to help those individuals who are trying to bring the child back that is missing. And if you are guilty as hell, even if you know that they might find something you don't want them to, it's better to look like you had nothing to hide. So going and getting that chair would have been a way of trying to deflect some of that guilt and to cause the officers to primarily believe that he has nothing to hide. And that may mean that they don't search as effectively as they ordinarily would. Now, the third search, well, that was carried out by a specialist team. And that team was comprised of a sergeant and 5 PCs. Now, during the fourth search, I know guys, the fourth search, this was not a castle, by the way. This was not a massive hotel with 150 rooms and a loft space that was thousands of meters squared. This was a small place. Then they have a fourth search. I know you guys are thinking, what? Wait a minute. There have been many trained professionals going around a relatively small house. How has a discovery of that nature not occurred if there is something there? Believe me, I'm asking the same questions. Particularly when there is this fourth search where they use a specially trained dog that literally signals to the ceiling below the loft. And the officers are like, oh look, the specially trained dog that's going to seek out these things is literally sat under the ceiling of the loft. Maybe we need to throw it out there and search the loft. What do you reckon? Yeah, I don't know. Let's not bother. He got us that chair, didn't he? They literally didn't bother searching it on that occasion because, of course, it had already been searched. And apparently the dog was too big to safely search the loft space. It makes sense, you know. We could go and search the loft space, being that it seems that this dog that's specially trained seems to think that there's something up there. But you know what? The dog's gonna be too big to go up there. Wait, stop. The dog was too big? Are you kidding me? If that was my daughter, I would have torn that ceiling down with my bare hands. Since when does health and safety trump finding a missing child? It's like, I don't know, get a slim female officer up there. I'm just throwing it out there. Back in the old days, they'd have probably just got a teenager off the street, wouldn't they? You seem like a slight teenager. Just come in here and do us a favor. You can't do that now. Risk assessment, health and safety, but you know, back in the 70s, they would have just been like, you, how old? 11. Younger than normal. Get up there. But it's the way that you would expect the police to want to respond because, and yet they feel that because, as far as they're concerned, it's had this brief search. There's no point doing it. Meanwhile, however, Hazel is wearing his innocent persona as loudly and as visibly as is possible. So he joins a local search in the area, and he's with officers and residents doing that. So if you happen to be the person responsible, you probably are going to want to follow what's happening. You're going to want to appear like an innocent person, but also enjoy the notoriety of recognizing the impact that you've had. So Hazel may well be involved in the search for Tia to create a guise of innocence. Honestly, this makes me physically sick. Imagine the adrenaline rush this sicko is getting, walking alongside her crying mother. That isn't human. On August 9th, 2012, finally. And the basis of using one of these animals is that they know how to detect specific things. This dog straight away signals to the loft space, and it's at this point they make an absolutely tragic discovery. So essentially, that might have been more difficult to pick up because obviously lofts are dark. But it would have taken a very rudimentary search to have discovered her right from the get-go. And they can tell when they see this package, essentially of black bags, that they are new because there isn't dust all over them. They were just free. They also noticed that the state of what they found, Stuart Hazel has told the police that that's what she left the home in, her yellow top and her gray trousers. And so he's created this photo fit and description of what she was last seen wearing when she disappeared. It's unbelievable that this vital evidence had been missed, as officers basically believed the bag was just too light to contain anything important. Let's be real. The bag was too light? That is the laziest police work I have ever heard of. It's a murder investigation, not a weightlifting competition. I mean, is it just me? Is it just me that when you're doing a search, you do it forensically, in detail? Anything can show you that a crime has played out. I mean, there was a huge amount of evidence in that loft space. How the police missed every single one of those bags, it almost makes you feel like they weren't looking for her there. And that created a psychological bias so that they didn't even consider that there was a possibility she was up there. At this point, Hazel obviously knows his time is up, doesn't he? So he goes on the run. However, there's a tip-off that's from a member of the public, and he's arrested the same day at Cannon Hill Common. That's in Morden. The police obviously are devastated that Tia's family have literally been living with this situation and it's taken such a long time to find her. They put it down to human error. Well, it wasn't dog error, was it? Because the dogs on both occasions clearly demonstrated that there was something to be concerned about in the loft. And it's not just human error, it's a massive group of humans' error, isn't it? Who should have known how to search a loft space just diligently when it comes down to a missing child? That delay of not being able to find Tia earlier, also, even though it's not necessarily more important, but for that anguish to be at least given a sense of justice in the end, you need to be able to create culpability in the perpetrator, right? If you don't find the person for a period of time to the point where the passage of time affects the evidence, that is a huge problem, because that completely detrimentally affects the investigation and the potential future prosecution. Vital evidence would have been lost. So that vital evidence doesn't bring closure to some degree for the family. They have to imagine what happened to Tia because of the circumstances. Tia's family will never know for sure what actually happened to her. Also, when you think about the amount of wasted man-hours that happened there was an incredible cost to the investigation. 1 week scouring the local area, trawling through literally hundreds of hours of CCTV. The whole time, Tia was literally a few feet from her bedroom in the house that she spent so much time in, feeling like she was safe there. Honestly, it's mind-blowing. It is mind-blowing that the police managed to miss this in the last place the victim 4 times. Now, the officers claim that it was procedural errors that were to blame. I'm not sure that that stands logically. I'm just not sure. Like, so you were told by the perpetrator, it seems, just because somebody says, well, they were just missing, doesn't mean you don't do a thorough search, because horrible things happen to people, but that was the excuse that they used. Now, ultimately, because obviously the offense is so serious that he's been charged with, he's remanded in custody at Belmarsh Prison. Now, at a later court hearing in March 2013, obviously the police have got evidence against Stuart Hazell. It's enormous. The fact that Tia was found in his home where he lived. So, it's obvious to everybody that he's responsible.
So what can you tell me about the murder of Tia Sharp, Stuart? Stuart?
Oh, a couple of minutes, you must listen, please.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's no problem. It's 1:10. We'll stop the tapes and we'll leave the room and give you a chance to have a chat.
2012. That was sometime after about 6:30 in the morning. That was the day that she disappeared. Now, although you could not actually say definitively that that was Tia, they knew it was her because it was her bed in the picture. And that picture showed something very clearly. And that's therefore why the police concluded that as far as they were concerned, this crime had been motivated by something deeply inappropriate. Also, it's worth bringing in what experts said about that photograph. Experts who reviewed the evidence came to certain conclusions about the timeline of events. Due to the nature of these findings, I cannot go into specifics here. The judge later noted that while a certain motivation seemed likely, it could not be proven beyond all doubt in a court of law. We can all assume that it makes perfect sense that this is somebody who was responsible for her passing for a certain motive. I don't think that's just an opinion. I think it's logic. On September 14th, 2012, Tia's funeral takes place. It was actually a private family service. They wanted to keep it on the lowdown because understandably, they were dealing with mass trauma, and it can be hugely overwhelming when hundreds of people turn up. So it shows that intimately, they just wanted to deal with their grief independently of the world, viewing them doing that. When it comes to the trial, well, on May 7th, 2013, Hazell's trial begins at the Old Bailey. Jurors get shown the photograph that Hazell had taken. When that happened, several of the jurors just gasped in horror. Of course, Hazell just denies any responsibility. In fact, this is where he goes with his "how do I act like a completely innocent person" routine. He says, you know what? I didn't cause Tia's passing. No. And let's just go with that. Let's just look at Stuart Hazell's logic. Because I do love a really stupid criminal's logic. Let's just go with this one, Stuart Hazell. So your suggestion is that when you were in care of her, and you sit and think, well, what should I do now? Should I dial 999, call an ambulance, get some help, acknowledge what a tragic situation has played out? Well, I could do that. You see, when people like Stuart Hazell believe that they can pull the wool over the eyes of the public, it demonstrates just how narcissistic they are. That if somehow they can convince themselves that this makes sense, they're going to be able to convince others. I mean, no one is going to believe that the lesser of two evils in a scenario where somebody passes tragically. On day 5 of the trial, this is shortly before the prosecution is going to commence its closing arguments. Guess what happens? Literally day 5, when they're about to go off and argue and put together reasons why he should be incarcerated, he decides now is a good time to say, I did it. Yeah. Now he thinks is a good point to be like, well, I've just cost an inordinate amount of money, but now I've made you pay for an incredibly expensive court case. But before you get to say guilty, throw everything at them, throw everything at Mr. Hazel. I'm like, I've kind of heard the evidence and it is quite compelling, and it seems that the prosecution have done a really good job. And it does seem that I'm definitely going to get found responsible. So I may as well just try to seem compliant and remorseful. Of course, we all know why he's doing this. He's doing this because he thinks it may reduce his sentence. And being loved by the people who adored her, because he's taken that from her. Understandably, he is facing the mandatory life sentence for what he did. So in sentencing him, Mr. Justice Nicole, he needs to establish the minimum term that would be required for Hazel to actually serve before he gets eligible for parole. Now, when it comes down to those all-important aggravating factors in this case, wow. First of all, Tia's young age, she was 12 years of age. Also, a massive breach of trust. That was her step-grandfather. She'd spent 5.5 years of her life building a relationship with him, trusting him. She viewed him as a loving adult. She trusted him to look after her. I genuinely think that he deserves a whole life term, full stop. But the judge felt like, even though it was, as far as he was concerned, but when it came down to the photo where the suspicion was that Tia was no longer alive, the fact that her phone hadn't been used for hours, the problem the judge had was it may not absolutely have been the case that she was. She could have been asleep. An aggravating factor is that he just went on national TV denying his involvement, basically telling the world he was innocent and completely lying about her whereabouts. Also, another aggravating factor was his massive list of previous convictions. They are highly aggravating. Don't get me wrong, those previous convictions, it was accepted that none had been for really serious events, but nonetheless, it evidences that this man was not pro-social. When it comes down to mitigation, well, you won't be surprised that the judge took into account Hazel's really quite troubled childhood, what we talked about earlier on. Plus, they said that they couldn't prove that the actual event had been premeditated, so it wasn't necessarily that he'd been planning this for a long period of time. However, even though they were mitigating factors, the guilty plea that he gave at the last minute, well, that didn't really carry any weight. It had become available at the 11th hour. And it also meant that Tia's family had basically endured 4 days of the trial. Remember as well, guys, that Tia's family are watching this play out. And his partner had been Tia's grandmother. Imagine where she is mentally. Her whole world has just absolutely disintegrated. And he is happy to support her through it. And he knows that she was charged initially on suspicion of being involved. I mean, how much more does he want to bestow on these individuals? And whilst I don't necessarily think that people like Hazel really understand remorse, it would have at least identified that he realized that he had done something wrong and he deserved to be punished. Hazel was ultimately sentenced to a minimum of 38 years, and that means he's going to be 75 when he becomes eligible for parole. 75? He might get out at 75. Sorry.
Tia Sharp's father said hearing what Hazel did to his daughter shattered his heart.
Hazel will be sentenced tomorrow. In my opinion, it would not be enough.
Hazel is a violent and dangerous man who poses a significant risk.
End of story. That's if the parole board ever deems that he's no longer a threat to the public, which, shall we have a vote? Shall we take a vote on whether Stuart Hazel, an individual capable of such acts, should ever walk the streets again? By the way, in the comments, feel free to say what you think about him, because I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say let him remain behind bars before facing whatever comes next, for eternity. The judge stated, she was a sparky girl. She was full of life. All that lay ahead of her, a career, loves, the family of her own will now never be. And the loss of her has been devastating for her mother, her father, and all of her relatives and her friends. The tragedy of their loss and her passing is because of your act.
There were gasps from the public gallery. Tia's family was sobbing loudly, and as Hazel was sent down, there was the cry of beast from a man in the public gallery. Now, the judge said that he could have imposed a whole life tariff on Stuart Hazel, but to do that, he would have had to...
You are responsible. I think it's really nice when a judge does a really strong summing up, letting them know about the ripple effect and impact on all the people that Tia loved, and all the people she should have known, and all the kids she should have had, and all the jobs she should have succeeded in. Croydon Council, they stated that the house where Tia was found, and I think that is the correct course of action. Because nobody should live in a home. Well, there's been a big debate about the role that inappropriate material had played in Hazel's actions. There was no doubt whatsoever when they explored his digital footprint that he had a considerable collection of material involving minors. Absolutely not underplaying it, but 12 in 1995. 4 years later, in 1999, that number had risen to 41,000. Nowadays, the number of unique images of that nature, online unique, is in the millions. Interestingly, a US study actually found that in both 2000 and 2006, 1 in 6 cases that involved the possession of this material detected offenders who had actually committed direct. One thing that has been interesting to explore is the fact that whilst this material has significantly increased, according to data and research, rates of these offenses seem to have fallen between 1990 and 2000. And this is actually substantiated in the US in particular, where cases have dropped by 53%. I just think that that means that a lot of people aren't taken very seriously when children come forward and talk about these things. I don't care what the charts say. Common sense tells me that if you are watching that kind of filth, but who am I to throw out such what I would consider massively logical common sense suggestions? Anyway, that's what the data says. It's saying that in spite of the fact that this continues to be a problem, it's not necessarily a consequence of today's more society, because the data doesn't support that. The argument is, yeah, it has always existed. And according to that data, one could argue, well, even more so, it existed in the past. I don't agree with it. Sorry. I know that I meant to bring research in and be like, the research and data tells us this. It's definitely a fact, but it just does not make sense. Oh, so there's millions and millions more photographs of kids, all different kids, but we're pretending that these offenses have dropped. It really drives me mad when research doesn't evidence clear logic. So in my opinion, it could just be, like I said, that they target very vulnerable kids, or that the mass problem has moved to poorer areas in the world. Think about in the UK, Gary Glitter. What a character. Now, in Hazel's case, I think we can all agree that we can link some of his offending behavior to his highly dysfunctional or difficult childhood. And what is quite surprising about this case, and I have covered a couple of others, like there were no warning signs as far as the family were concerned about the uncle's behavior. Similarly, in this case, Hazel didn't necessarily give off any warning signs to family members that he was such a. Now, arguably, we can say, well, he was clearly an accomplished liar. You know, this is a man who survived some pretty inhospitable experiences by manipulating the system, getting involved in crime, taking things that weren't his. So he is somebody who's quite happy to involve himself in criminal behavior. And often that involves lying. Now, a man who actually led a window cleaning round to Hazel later stated that he used to talk about a father who passed from a heart attack. And he said that when Hazel would talk to him about his father who passed from this heart attack, he'd basically break down crying about it. The only problem was his father was still alive. Also, he was known to kind of change versions of events at will, and it really didn't bother him whether these points that he was making were very important or weren't important at all. He just liked lying. So it could be that there is a compulsive liar within him. Also, what makes him scary is that Hazel was not on the police radar. He hadn't committed a serious offense of this nature in his history that had at least been found out. This story shows us that the most dangerous place isn't always a dark alley. It can be the very sanctuary where we feel safest. The scariest realization isn't just the crime, but that a monster can wear the mask of a loving grandfather for 5 years without slipping once, proving that evil doesn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looks like family. Now, tell us honestly, what makes your blood boil more? The fact that Stuart Hazel could look into a camera. Do you have similar stories? Share them in the comments. Let's talk about this together. If this story touched you, subscribe so you don't miss the next case, which will shock you even more. May Tia Christine Sharp rest in peace. The Bible says in Luke chapter 12, verse 2, "For there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, neither hid that shall not be known." And this story proves it. Take this as a warning. Monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table. So trust your instincts, because the people closest to us are the ones who can hurt us the most. Now look at the screen. You see the next videos we prepared for you. Believe me, we worked just as hard on them. So we don't say goodbye. May God bless you, and see you there.